The Protestant Reformation is the context for this pamphlet by Margaret Fell that argues for the right of women to speak in public. It might be valuable to recall some of the obstacles to women as speakers that are deeply embedded in the Western philosophical and rhetorical traditions that we have studied. First, women are associated with the body in a tradition that privileges mind over body. Second, women are associated with emotion in a tradition that privileges reason over emotion. And thirdly, women are associated with rhetoric, that is, with ornamentation and style and beauty, in a tradition that prefers philosophy over rhetoric. All of these prejudices shape the way that the Western or Latin Church interpreted Scripture. In the dominant interpretation, women are identified with Eve's decision from the book of Genesis to listen to the serpent and eat the forbidden fruit, and her punishment, that her husband would rule over her, was interpreted as normative, not merely descriptive. This view of women was extended into the way that the New Testament was understood to give men the privilege of leadership in the church, since Jesus picked only male apostles, and because Paul made a number of remarks about the subordination of women to men in family life and in the church in his epistles. Margaret Fell takes on this entire Western cultural and religious understanding of women as the subordinate property of men who should properly be silent in public space. She offers a close reading of the many appearances of women in the Bible to show that, in fact, women of the Bible speak, and speak often, and speak with authority and power. Fell writes and speaks, of course, as a Quaker Christian, and thus as a representative of one of the factions of the Protestant Reformation. Quakers gave an unusual amount of spiritual authority to women, making them the equal of men not only in church but also in family life, and insisting that the inner light of God's truth burned as brightly in women as in men. In this teaching, Quakers took a prominent teaching of the Protestant Reformation, the priesthood of all believers, and radicalized it, applying it to everyone in the church without qualification, including most notably women and slaves. This is why Quakers were at the cutting edge of not only the movement for women's equality, but also of the movement to abolish slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries. It's also why they were pacifists, because since every human being carried the inner light of God within them, to take a life is also to extinguish that light. As you read this pamphlet by Margaret Fell, I think it is helpful to look for the ways that it reflects both Renaissance humanism and Reformation spirituality. Take note of the way in which being human is celebrated, of the way in which the capacity for speech is valorized, and of the way that being in the image of God is seen as the ground for celebrating both humanity and eloquence. If we compare this with Erasmus's Copia, we might see also some of the ways in which Fell's writing feels similar, at least in the sense that Fell's pamphlet seeks to overwhelm the reader with a veritable flow of biblical examples, stories, metaphors, and images of women speaking with authority. She is writing very much in the spirit of the river of eloquence that Erasmus celebrates. This pamphlet is also a display of the prominent emphasis in the Reformation of sola scriptura, Scripture alone, relying on the text of the Bible as the primary source of spiritual authority, rather than on church dogmas, traditions, and institutional precedents. Her writing assumes that any ordinary person can read in the Bible the same spiritual and rhetorical empowerment of women that she finds there, and she makes her sources available, citing specific texts so that her audience can look them up for themselves. This is a text that models the spiritual authority and eloquence that Margaret Fell believes women are capable of. It was first published in 1666, centuries before most women in England, Europe, or North America were granted the kind of freedom and equality in public speech that her writing heralded. Even today, we still encounter many of the prejudices that Margaret Fell challenged, prejudices that appear, for example, when a woman seeks to be President of the United States, or still in many churches when a woman seeks to be pastor. We might consider in our class discussion some of these ongoing challenges to women who speak with authority in public settings. How does Fell's pamphlet address these challenges? And what about the story of her life, as described in the introduction to her pamphlet, helps to explain her vision of women's spiritual equality, astonishing and unlikely as it was in her time and place?